years later, I look at gifted education and its connection to equity consciousness, because when I go around to different school districts and I ask teachers to tell me how do they do pedagogy through equity in their classrooms, they have a really hard time defining what equity looks like in their classroom. But if I say to them, what does gifted education look like? What do you do when you're told you have the gifted class? They come out with all personalized learning. You know, they're talking about starting with student strengths. They talk about giving students opportunity for investigations. And that exactly is what equity should be. Equity consciousness should really be about. So going a little bit further, when we think about how they define gifted education, it's always about drawing out potential, which is what EDUCO is actually defined as. And so when we think about this equity consciousness that Lauren and I are going to talk to you about, keep thinking gifted education, not a gifted program, but the kind of education that not only draws out potential, but helps students thrive and flourish. That's an equity consciousness. So we're going to focus, especially the first half, on engagement, because equity consciousness is how we make the strong intention of engaging all students so we can surface their innate potential. That, again, is an equity consciousness. So I'm going to start with a little equity exercise for you. You notice there are 6 boxes. I'm going to ask you, what do you think the catalyst is that motivates the creation of gifted programs or gifted education for some students and not all? What is it that is that, as I said, the catalyst? What's the driving force? So I'm going to ask you to chat it in. What do you think? It has to have 6 letters. So I'm going to ask you what you think that is. Lauren is reading the chats as they come in. What do you think? What is it that drives it for some? For some. Lauren, getting anything? Lauren, I can't hear you.
We have equity, we have curiosity, we have income, we have racism, success, talent.
Okay, all right, stop. I'm going to give you the first letter. Anybody want to switch what they had chatted in? What do you think now? I'll give you 2 letters. What do you think? What's coming in? Any changes now, Lauren?
Belief, belief.
Belief, 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 yes. Belief. So what's my point? When you believe in students, when they are not otherized with disenfranchised labeling, and we really focus on gray matter, we have that belief, then we start to think about how we go through the kind of pedagogy that's going to elicit that. So here we go. That is the idea of a pedagogy of confidence. It starts with belief. So I'm going to give you a little, my idea here is to give you a little neuroscience that supports what we're saying. So you can see Einstein's picture up there. I put him up there because you notice it says the Einstein effect. I put him up there because usually when people say, who would you identify as a gifted person, alive or dead? I will tell you that about 80% of the time, Einstein comes up first as a gifted person. But this is the interesting thing here. Notice this article. It says why there's no such thing as a gifted child. It says even Einstein was unexceptional as a youth. So the whole art of this whole video that I'm going to show you says adults can help almost any child to really surface this kind of potential. So as you're watching the video, it is only 1 minute and 22 seconds. So as you're watching it, again, why? Because we're talking about belief and why we must have this belief and this idea of moving ahead in an equity consciousness. I'd like you to be looking for 2 things. What are they saying in neuroscience is the most critical factor in developing talent or high intellectual performance, that innate gift that we're saying all of us really have the capacity for? And what's the implication of this science for pedagogy, for teaching? So let's see what it says here.
And I can't.
The human brain is a network of approximately 100 billion neurons. Different experiences create different neural connections which bring about different emotions. And depending on which neurons get stimulated, certain connections become stronger and more efficient, while others may become weaker. This is what's called neuroplasticity. Someone who trains to be a musician will create stronger neural connections that link the two hemispheres of the brain in order to be musically creative. Virtually any sort of talent or skill can be created through training. Rudiger Gann, who was a self-admitted hopeless student, used to fail at basic math and went on to train his abilities and became a famous human calculator, capable of performing extremely complex mathematics. Rationality and emotional resilience work the same way. These are neural connections that can be strengthened. Whatever you are doing at any time, you are physically modifying your brain to become better at it. Since this is such a foundational mechanism of the brain, being self-aware can greatly enrich our life experience.
So, what did you hear? Let's do another chat time. What are the most critical, or is the most critical factor? If I'm saying belief obviously is important, what is it? Why should we believe? What is neuroscience saying? So if you'll chat in, Lauren will tell us some of the chats as they come in. What would you say? What did you hear?
Plasticity.
Neuroplasticity, okay.
Circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Training and practice.
Right.
Eliciting information from students. Changing your beliefs about yourself. Anything is possible. The brain is not static. It can be enhanced through training.
Good. Give me about 4 more.
Self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Motivation.
Okay.
Engaging the child.
Great.
And the capacity for everyone, the capacity for development is within our reach, and then hope and belief again.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's look at this. So what we're talking about is this idea again of engagement. How do we engage the brain? If we have the capacity, you know, it's like a house that's just been built and there's all the wiring is in the house, but then somebody goes in, the buyer comes in and flips on the switch and nothing happens. And then you say, why? The house was built, the wires are there. Well, because the electricity isn't there, the stimulation isn't there, the engagement isn't there to make the neurons fire as if they're going through this wiring. And that is why if we're going to talk about equity consciousness, we have to say to ourselves, what do we intentionally do, explicitly do to engage the learners? And we're going to look a little more closely at that. So in the work of the pedagogy of confidence, the idea of a vision for equity consciousness is gifting. How do we gift students so that we can elicit their natural, innate potential for high intellectual performance? And I'm including creativity there, I'm including innovation, I'm including even the emotional side of this where people say, well, those are soft skills. It's not. That's still about high intellectual performancing. So here we go. What do we do then? One thing is we want to give students so they can be self-determined, so they believe in themselves and their capacity. I don't care who they are. I don't care where they're from. They have the capacity. Even students who have been through severe brain trauma can have their brains modified with the kind of engagement connecting to their frame of references and this idea of the belief that's behind it so that they will thrive and flourish. And that's where we're going to go a little more specifically now. So that's the cover of the book, The Pedagogy of Confidence, but the whole idea is how do we rekindle? How do we inspire? Inspiration is so critical. HIP stands for High Intellectual Performance. What are we doing? So I'm going to share with you 7 high operational practices that are used. I have done the research around them, but I did not invent them. This is what cognitive and neuroscientists say, and I've done a lot of work in looking at people like Einstein and other people who have been labeled as gifted, and they've had these 7 kind of practices that we are trying to look at, including in pedagogy, like identifying and activating strengths. Isn't that interesting? In gifted programs, they always start by identifying strengths. In all other programs, we're told to look for deficits and that we should really focus on deficits. Isn't that what they always say? And if that was true, if that was going to be helpful, we'd be in a really different place right now with all of our students, and we're not. And so the idea of identifying and activating strengths become really important. Building relationships, and why is that so important? I'm sure that if we were to ask you which one you would think would be more important, usually that one comes up, but for 2 reasons. One is when you are in a good relationship in a classroom, with peers, with a spouse, with friends, your body lets off a neurotransmitter that's called oxytocin. And that helps engage the wiring in the brain so you can think at higher levels. So that idea of relationships become critical. Let's look at the others. And I want to just put this slide up because hopefully Lisa had put in the chat a link that you could get a little explanation of the 7 high operational practices, the idea of why enrichment and prerequisites and situating learning in the lives of students and amplifying student voice is so critical. So you'll take the time to read it. And also, I will say that after I present, when Lauren is up, she's going to get into each one of these from a different kind of a perspective that can get us more within this frame of thinking about an equity consciousness. So one, I always start with the idea of identifying strengths. Again, why? Because usually when people are thinking about our kids who have been otherized, they don't start with identifying strengths. The other thing we're going to look at right now is this idea of prerequisites. We know we're going to introduce something new to students. How do we inform them? How do we give them the kind of frame, the ideas, the schema to help move them through the learning so we can elicit this high operational practice? So I want to show another little video of some first graders. Okay, now why? Because here they are. These are first graders. We'll talk a little bit more about them, but this is what I want you to look for. Think about prerequisites that I was talking about, but think about those 7 high operational practices. So this is what I want you to look for. What do you infer, first of all, about the student potential? As you hear them responding, what can you infer? And the second, what do you infer about the teacher pedagogy? What the teacher is doing in the classroom that enables the students to come up with the responses they are. So I'm going to put the video on. There's a little background noise because it was in a classroom, but we put captions on it. So hopefully this won't disturb you too much. So here we go.
You have this schema in your head, and how come you can make predictions if you already know it? I know, that's why I put my thumbs down. Because you use your brain when you draw the schema. Yeah, it helps you know what the word means. Happen in your life when you remember from a long time, you have schema with the word. Our center was a schema building.
A center?
And we had to take this text to self connection. And you could map the memories in your life, circle that. Background knowledge and higher knowledge.
When you say text check, what does that mean?
It means when a book, it reminds you of another book, or a film, or movie, or cartoon. It flips to something that reminds you something about reminds you about something that you did of the same of the book that you read. Why do we need why does maps make us our thoughts neat?
The students writing, they have obviously a lot more control.
Sure.
Because they've created the map.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so I love that. I love watching these children. So again, this is chat time. We love your input. What did that video show you, or what did you infer about the potential of these students? And what did you infer especially about the pedagogy? What do you think the teacher's practice is like? So if you do some chatting in now, and Lauren will share what's coming in from all across the country here as you've been viewing this, what do you think? What's your thinking? Lauren, what's coming in?
Encouraging to think. High expectations lead to deeper thinking. Ability to put their thinking into great sentences. Curious, inquisitive students.
Okay.
Metacognition. She values transformational teaching, high expectations, encouraging higher order critical thinking. Student potential is amazing. Respect for individual learners. Not infantilizing students with watered down language. Asking clarifying questions. There is no limit.
Great.
Language
All right.
modeling.
That is an equity consciousness. What that teacher uses now, I don't know if you noticed, but this was an ELL class, an English learners, right? English language. But did you hear their language, right? They can talk about schema in such a powerfully clear way. And that is because that's the way this teacher talks to them. They don't have only 10 new spelling words a week. Their list of learning is unlimited. And so, you know, Jean Piaget used to say, task before performance. In other words, if you want high-level thinking, you've got to give high-level activities, high-level practices that really push kids to the frontier of their intelligence. And so what we love about that video and what we're talking about is in reimagining education, we have 3 ideas here. One is the power of affirmation. This teacher, and so many of you, as I know, because you probably wouldn't be on this particular webinar, is you affirm students. I started with talking about the power of identifying strengths. Affirmation is a recognition of strengths. And the idea of how we give ourselves affirmation or we give students affirmation really pushes forward the neurotransmitters that allow for deeper thinking levels. And there's all kinds of studies around the power of affirmation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. The other idea is inspire, how important these students are so inspired. They have no problem talking about text to text. And I love that you can map the memory of your mind, your brain. And that was, wow. If you open the door, you will hear real jewels. And the whole idea of to mediate, to give students the kind of prerequisites, as I talked about, that enable us to elicit the power of their brains. They are in what we call a community of belonging. That is the kind of class those students were in. What does that mean? Actually, right here, these are, some of these are students from Newark, New Jersey, the ones on the left. And Lauren's gonna talk to us about Newark, New Jersey. And when these students, if you notice, the students on the left are sitting at a table with their teacher, they are involved in a collaborative professional learning experience where the students and the teachers are at professional learning together. In a community of belonging, what happens is everybody feels affiliated. They feel there's something about them that they see reflected in that class. They're not otherized, they belong. They look for where they intersect in terms of community and communing. In a community of belonging, they are valued. They know they're valued. Affirmations are used all the time. Teachers start by identifying their strengths, their interests, checks in with them over the course of the year. And if students are saying they don't have any strengths, which sometimes happens, we talk about their interests. We teach them about neuroplasticity so they understand about the growth potential of their brain. The whole idea of looking at the agency of students, I'm just moving this, the agency of the students. What is it? How do we give them voice and that they have power? Their input is important. And we look at it in terms of the last aspect is we want them to invest in this process. In equity consciousness, we create communities of belonging where no one feels otherized. And that is really this distinction here. And so I am actually going to pass this over to Lauren now. I'm going to close down because Lauren is going to take us on a little trip across what are some of the things we have to be conscious of that can really be barriers to not only the community of belonging, but to actually surfacing the innate capacity of all students. So Lauren, I'm stop share, your time.
Okay. All right. Well, it is always an honor to follow behind Dr. Jackson. She has been a tremendous influence on me professionally. Her book changed my life and informed a great body of work that at the time that I read it, I was engaged with here in Newark. It has been shared across this city. I give her work to anyone that I possibly can. So I just have to say that as I enter into this conversation with all of you. And you, Dr. Jackson, now have to manage the chat box.
Yes, I am ready to manage that.
There's like orange light popping up. So I'm Lauren Wells, and I am an educator, organizer, researcher, and I try to be a disruptor within the system, which is a very interesting position to occupy. As was said at the beginning, I started in education while I was in college, working in an after-school program at Temple University, and was struck by the kinds of things that I saw happening to the children in this program that were reminiscent of some of my own experiences in schooling and the experiences of my friends and peers, most of whom are Black and brown like myself. And so that kind of just pushed me into a desire to teach. I ended up teaching at a high school in the Bronx, and from the moment that I entered the school, what has always been most hurtful to me and also most emotional to me, this is a very emotional topic, was the ways in which I saw how learning and school was organized for the students that I was in front of. And for me, that is the conditions, that is the building, that is the cafeteria, that is the curriculum, that is the classroom, that is all of the things that go into creating conditions where we expect children to learn and teachers to teach. And I just couldn't fathom how anyone could possibly expect to bring out the best in anyone in an environment where during lunch, the trash bags were pulled out of the trash cans and sat along the wall and left there lunch period after lunch period after lunch period, right? And so when we talk about beliefs, those get to being very symbolic of a lack of belief in the children and in the school. I left and became a sort of an intermediary working with schools and with districts at the Metropolitan Center for Urban Education at NYU, and came into relationship with the Newark Public School District through an initiative called the Broader, Bolder Approach to Education. And in that work, I worked with 7 principals in Newark, worked with the community, worked with teachers, worked with students, worked with community agencies to think about what is a holistic, comprehensive way to think about how we transform schools so that they serve the students that are in them and that they are deeply connected to the communities around them. In that work, and in any work as a consultant or an outside person, you become exposed to other people doing the work. And one of the things that I found and that I wanted to be an agent for changing was a real lack of organizations that were led by, driven by people of color and driven by the kinds of ideas that Yvette has talked about that are explicitly about walking into a system and challenging the fundamental beliefs under which everything has taken place. So I formed Creed Strategies, and we really do work alongside educators and communities to create the conditions where genius is ablaze. And that's not just for the students, that's for all of those who we come into contact with in the paradigm or the place where we're working. We're a collective of individuals. My leading partner on this, and I don't know if she's on here watching, is my sister, who is also a life educator, 20 years as a teacher, a literacy coach, a principal, central auth administrator, gifted and talented program developer, as well as in terms of Newark, Clifton Thompson, who was a consultant on the project, and Dr. John A. Wingfield. And so I bring together individuals from different backgrounds and different experiences within education to work alongside of the district, the school, to really help them think about, if we want to create the conditions where the high operational practices that Yvette has spoken about can come to life, where they can thrive, what is it that we need to do? So enough about me. This slide represents what? You can chat it away. What do you think this slide is representing?
We have inequity, imbalance, oppression, white privilege, tipping the scale, lack of priority, injustice, perceived balance and equality, inequity, dominance.
So all of those words, right, describe systems that are organized and where there is an imbalance and inequity, right? And so poverty and racism in the society that we exist in are two leading systems that really serve to create disparate and completely, I think, inhumane outcomes for a significant number of people, Black and brown people. And there are effects of those on education, employment, right, food deserts, healthcare, housing, and wealth. And I need to move this, okay, so that I can see the other side of my slides. Housing and wealth, right? And all of these things have existed. There's nothing here that's surprising to anyone. However, we enter into the present moment. What is going on? Let's see. We enter into the present moment, right? We enter into the COVID area, right? And so when we talk about the impacts of all of this pre-COVID, we talk about wealth. What COVID does is it highlights for us the realities of what the consequences of these pre-existing systemic inequities are on communities of color. And particularly this slide talks about Black family income, right? And so you can see that the median Black family income is a little bit more than half of that for all families in the country. When we look at employment and we look at those who are being most impacted at the current time by COVID, right? We know that it's our essential workers. 12% of the population nationally are Black folks. Disproportionately, we see overrepresentation in terms of food service, postal workers, public transportation, home health aides, nursing facilities, all of those people that are right now on the front lines of supporting and keeping the basic minimum of our economy going. And then when we look at deaths, we see a direct correlation, right, between the way that these systemic inequities have structured access to employment, access to income, and ultimately morbidity and death for our communities. So when we think about how this translates to school, and these are just some examples of what inequity looks like in schools. We have curriculum inequities, we have teacher inequities, we have class size inequities, facility inequities, all kinds of resource inequities that have really, again, become very glaring during this time, whether it's access to technology in the hardware, whether it's access to the Wi-Fi, whether it's how many people are in a home, whether it's access and ability to get to and from to school, to pick up lunches, and all of those sorts of things. Is there anything here that you all would like to add that I may not have included in this brief list of inequities in schools? Okay, we got some
Belief,
belief,
right. Justice system,
justice system,
discipline,
discipline. Right, and so all of these inequities are connected to structures, to systems, and importantly, to the idea of beliefs. Beliefs underlie everything we do, all of our actions, all of our habits, all of our behaviors. And so it is Teacher Appreciation Week. Yes? How many teachers are there out there? If you're a teacher, put up your hand or a thumb. Are we getting anything in the chat? If you're a retired teacher, put up a hand or a thumb. Right, so we're a universe of educators, and we know how important it is to feel appreciated, to feel valued, and to feel that we are competent and have the resources that we need to do our jobs. And so I hope that all this week, your students, your administrators, your parents, we're flooding all of you with love, because you are at home right now doing a yeoman's job that can never be underestimated. You have adapted quickly. You have found ways to support your students, whether it's with the academic pieces or the other pieces that you know affect their learning. And so I want to offer into this conversation, I think that those things are so necessary and so important for teachers to be provided with incentives and the kinds of things that are physical demonstrations of respect and value for what you do. Every time I'm sorry about that. What's happening here? I also think that one of the most important things that we could do to demonstrate to teachers that we value and appreciate them is to create the conditions for the high operational practices to be put into practice. Because ultimately, from my point of view, from my experience in the classroom, from my interaction and conversations and work with teachers, is that teachers want to teach. That simply being able to do their job in a way that is meaningful to themselves and to their students and draws out of their students everything that they have inside of them is what teachers really want. And so while we should continue to do all of the things that are necessary to show appreciation, we should also be at this point in time thinking about what is absolutely necessary to create the conditions where any teacher can walk into their classroom on any given day and draw out the strengths of their students. So we're going to go back to beliefs, right? Beliefs underlie policies, they underlie systems, they underlie practices. And so if we're going to get to a set of policies, systems, and practices that do what I think could help transform the system in the most impactful way, in which we work very hard to try to do wherever we do, and that is amplify voice, then we have to put in place and challenge traditional hierarchical deficit and racist paradigms for organizing education. We have to fundamentally challenge the belief systems on which we do everything, right? So we have to challenge a belief system that says parents are only allowed to give input into education in this way, and create a space for parents to give input into education in a different way. That's the beginning of amplifying voice, simply creating the space. And the same is for partners, for students, for teachers. So if you believe that what people have to say is important and valued, and that they know their craft, and that they are capable of bringing out results, then you're going to do a set of things that's going to allow them to have voice into their practice. And so we're going to come to Newark and take a little time talking about work that I've been doing here for the last 2 years, but much longer than that, that's really around how do you mobilize a system that is a system, and just like any other system, it's actually very resistant to voice. That's what they're organized to do, right? They're organized to move in ways that allow people to participate on the fringes and not create ways in which you really elicit the kinds of understandings, the kinds of ideas, and the kinds of solutions that come from people who are most impacted from the problem in order to craft solutions that directly affect those problems. So Newark, just a little bit about Newark. Newark is the 3rd oldest city in the nation. It is the largest city in the state of Newark. There are approximately 300,000 residents here. It is situated in the Northeast Corridor. There's a seaport, there's airport. We are home to probably one of the largest communities of higher education in the country per mile. And we are what I think is a unique city that is extremely diverse, that is extremely rich in history, that is extremely rich in community organizing history, and extremely rich in history that has to do with challenging systems that people have experienced as oppressive over time. In 1995, Newark was taken over by the state. In 2018, local control was returned due to the efforts of many of the faces that I actually see here on the side of my screen. So Tony, Denise, I'm sure in some ways Saphir and Afel were involved. I can't see other folks, but this is a place where people fight and voice what is necessary to elevate the dignity of the people that live here, of our students, of all of our residents, and try to really work to change the systems. So, eliciting voice in Newark Public Schools. In 2018, the first locally appointed superintendent, Roger Leon, was put into place, and he commissioned a process of the development of a 1-year strategic plan and a 2-year strategic plan. A little bit about Newark Public Schools. There are 66 schools in the district. You can see as all of this pops up. Approximately 3,000 teachers, approximately 6,000 employees. The total enrollment is close to 35,500, almost an even split between male and female students. And here are the demographics of the district. So the district is primarily Black and Latino. Approximately 3,000 white students, and approximately 82% of the students in Newark Public Schools receive free and reduced price lunch. So in the charge of leading a strategic planning process that would transform the district, we pulled together a series of community events, community meetings, as well as internal processes to elicit as much voice from as many stakeholders and individuals in the system as we possibly could. There were roundtables that were established that included teacher roundtable and student roundtables. There were internal meetings with district staff and with external community partners. There were community meetings that happened across 5 of the schools in each of the 5 wards of the cities. There was also a student conference that we planned that pulled together over 250 students from across the district, from grades 6 to 12. Every school attended, and the purpose of this conference was in alignment with Yvette's work to engage the students in both the knowledge building around the neuroscience and the working of the brain, but also to elicit their input into what it would take to make the 7 high operational practices real in their education. So this is a very short clip of how we opened the conference, and this is Dr. Jackson coming to share her work. And as she opens with having the students go across the auditorium that we are in at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and simply stand up collectively together as a group, table by table, and say, I am gifted. And I think that what's really important to sort of preface as we go into this is these are students who have come from across the city. They do not necessarily know each other across the room. They have never met Dr. Jackson before in their lives, and we are just opening the conference. We have heard from the superintendent, we have heard from the mayor, there's been a few introductions, but I think this is important because when we talk about community of belonging, what you're going to see in the comfort level that these students have is that they have already walked into a space where they feel it is okay to do something that they may not normally do.
I love it. Yes, 12, Robert, 12, okay. Yes, 19. 20. Yes, 21. Where's 21?
So like Dr. Jackson, I love watching the children because that's all that we need, right? To remind us of what the purpose of our work is and to have that feeling, that connection to something greater than ourselves. So when I see the kids, I see the greatness that is their possibility and my possibility and your possibility as well. And so I am going to focus on the eliciting of teacher and student voice, although at the beginning I talked about the amplification of all voice because this is Teacher Appreciation Week. And we wanted to show the ways in which both teachers and students in Newark Public Schools, as we went through the strategic planning process, talked about what was important to them and what mattered to them. So identifying and activating student strengths. And there are responses on both sides. On the left is teacher, on the left is student, on the right is teacher. And I think that what has popped out for me as I've looked at these slides time and time again is that both teachers and students talk about being intentional about incorporating their strengths into either their professional practice or to their learning, right? When a teacher says, place us where we are most successful, they are saying, set us up to do what we're good at. They're saying, set us up to use our strengths so that we can help our students be successful, right? And if you're on here and you're a teacher, you know that very often that may not be the reality in your practice. You may end up in a classroom that has perhaps nothing to do with your certification. Maybe you've never taught that grade level before. Maybe you might even be out of content area, right? And so that's what they're saying. Be intentional about putting us where we're going to use our strengths. And students are saying, when you're planning for us, plan for us to use our strengths. Plan it into the lesson. Give us an opportunity when we're in a classroom, engaged with the teacher, engaged with the students, engaged with the content, to use our strengths, right? We've all been in a moment where we've walked in and someone has asked us to lead with something we're not good at. What happens to you? I know what happens to me, and it's kind of like this balloon that flies away and I'm trying to grab it, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. The other thing that really jumps out at me is this idea of student interest and incorporating that. And I get that both from the idea of the teacher saying students should have 4-year plans, right? That they're responsible for crafting, and students explicitly saying, explain more on what we know and want to learn to do. When we think about, did I skip the slide? Oh no, it's repeated. There's something going on with the, okay, whatever. Okay, so building relationships. So students and teachers both talk about time. Time is really important to building relationships. Students say, give us time to build relationships, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And teachers say, professionally, we need more time to build relationships. We need more time to collaborate. Both say this is beyond the classroom. Building relationships is not something that's confined to academic content or academic learning or instruction and pedagogy. Being relational is a process that that extends beyond the learning that we want to happen in the classroom, and perhaps we might not even be able to make that learning happen if we don't have these other opportunities around us to build relationships. And then this last piece around adult and student accountability that the students raise for us, I think is really important, because when you are in relation with someone, you have more of an ability to hold yourself accountable to that person and to hold that other person accountable. And so when we get into these realities of homework or projects or how students behave in class, we all know, right, that if you're in a classroom and you've got things going on and students are being disruptive, the better your relationship with that student, the easier it is to mediate that behavior. When we talk about eliciting high intellectual performance, right, and not just academic performance, but to Yvette's point when she was talking, intellectual performance is the performance of the mind. It's our thoughts, it's our ideas, it's our creativity. It's our ability to take what we know and expand on it to create new things in the world. That is intellectual performance. This is what students have to say about how you should do that. And when we started to input this data and we looked at this, this is intellectual. They have defined for us what rigor is. No one said to the students, what is rigor, right? No one said, what does it look like in your classroom? If you ask them that, they probably say, well, I don't know, I've never heard of that, right? That's academic jargon that we use, but they have said this to us explicitly. We want harder work. We want better, broader questions that make us think. We actually think that students should be mixed, that we shouldn't be separated, that there should be an environment where we are able to ask questions and teachers should be able to use creative methods of teaching. So the students are brilliant, right? We need to start pulling more of them into the teacher pipeline because there's something intuitive about what learning is. And teachers, this is what they had to say. Ensure that rigor is understood. Do at a professional applied level, we have the depth of understanding about rigor that is necessary to be able to put it in practice in ways in our classroom that challenge our students and take them to the edge of their frontier, to use a phrase of Dr. Jackson's, without causing them fear. Right, and then that goes back to the relational piece. And then this idea of teaching children how to learn, the brain science, the neuroscience, the understanding of what learning is, the metacognitive aspects of monitoring your thinking while you're engaged in the learning process so that you can see how your own mind works. Providing enrichment. This is what students and teachers had to say. Right, and I think that it's clear that on both sides, learning is grounded in experience, that it's experiential. The students pulled out this idea of culture and the role of belief, and teachers talk about arts programs, and so there's this idea that culture, belief, arts, things that are outside of the academic curriculum are essential to academic learning, that they, to use the neuroscience language, they enrich the brain, right? They create the neural pathways that allow for you to take the academic learning and turn it into creativity and innovation and new ideas in the world, and to move your understanding of your own knowledge and the knowledge of others forward. So enrichment is not simply just an after school program. And we talk about it in this context. If we look at the roots in the trees, we're talking about what are we going to put into the soil to enrich the soil so that it's healthy enough to allow the roots to expand and to grow further. So this idea of situating learning in the lives of students. We are in the present moment, right? It's very idealistic, very hopeful to have the conversation that we're having around these practices, but we have to come back to the reality of where we are. So what does situating learning in the lives of students look like for students? Relatable, interactive lessons. They want to do more than look at textbooks. They want the truth taught to them. They think that the curriculum needs to be changed. Current events are important, and they want people to worry about their mental health. Would anyone like to share a reflection on these statements from students in the present moment? In the reality that we're living in, and whatever the slide and the students' comments evoke for you.
See, not yet, not getting any yet.
It's a heavy moment, I know.
Right.
Right. And so then when we get to what teachers had to say about situating learning in the lives of students, right? There's this idea that schools are community hubs, that whatever we're doing, the policies, the systems, the practices, that they need to be grounded in research that is related to the population of the schools, of the students in the schools where they are. That it needs to show that this is good for our kids, right? That there's social emotional support, that there are academic interventions, that there's parent support groups and SAC personnel, which are the support, the substance abuse and alcohol personnel in schools, and that there's culturally responsive education, right? And so you can do your own crosswalk here between what students say and what teachers say, but I think it's, you know, it's pretty obvious that students and teachers want to engage in curriculum that is broader than what's in textbooks, that they want the students to have the supports that they need to be able to come to school and know that they are healthy enough, that they are going to get the resources that they need to be able to engage in the learning process. The amplification of voice, which is the last of the 7 high operational practices that we looked at. We did not engage the students around prerequisites for learning. Again, I think that what's amplified here are the taking into consideration what people say and doing it, right? There's a lot of times where input is elicited, whether it's from a teacher, whether it's from a parent, whether it's from a student, it gets written down and it goes somewhere and nothing ever happens to it, right? And so, but when we talk about amplifying voice, the best way for people to know that you have heard them is to do it, to put into action what you have heard. And again, this idea of time comes up, so that the time that is necessary to hear people, to engage with people, to build relationships with people is very important and essential to creating spaces where voice can be heard, where people feel comfortable using their voice and using their agency to express what it is that is most important. There's something that I want to highlight in all of these, and it has to do with the students and this trend that goes across all of them that's about their support for each other and creating the opportunities for them to be together in ways that allow them to help each other learn and help each other deal with the issues that they're facing. So here it's allow us to help each other. Earlier it was Student grouping should be mixed grouping. There's peer-to-peer learning, right? And so students are very, very clear that they don't want to be isolated and they don't want to be separated, and they see themselves as connected to each other, and they want that connection to be structured and organized so that they can do it more and perhaps even amplify their voices a little bit more. It's hard to amplify your voice as an individual for all of you who are organizers on here. So what does this mean schools should do, or schools should be? The pictures that you have here are a mix of breakout sessions from the conference with the students that we had last year. And what you see in these pictures, the top two pictures, are groups of students that are primarily student facilitated with coaching, mediation, and support from either a teacher or a leader of one of the community organizations that were part of facilitating this conference. And you can see that in this room, again, the students are highly engaged, they are active, they're participating. The circle at the bottom with the little one with the mic, this is the end of the conference. I don't know, this girl looks to be between 8 and 10. We were asking the students to report out. And again, at the end of the conference, in a room full of 250 of her peers, she is doing the report out for her group, which again shows the community of belonging, the space that was created for these students to feel that they were safe, but also to feel that what they had to say was important. So schools should be places where there is care, connection, collaboration, where students, teachers feel known and empowered, where learning leads, where it is relevant, rigorous, meaningful, and applied, where it reaches beyond the academics, and where there is real support for real needs, right? There's support sometimes. It may not necessarily address a real need. It may be a program or a partnership that is a good program or a partnership, but the extent to which it's actually serving a need that needs to be met is something that should always be thoughtfully considered. And how do we do this? Communities of belonging, culturally responsive and sustaining education. And so that's a broad phrase, right? It's a broad field within the field, but I want to offer that this is not just curriculum. This is policy, these are systems, these are practices. So when we talk about creating culturally responsive and sustaining education, we are not just talking about what teachers do in the classroom, which is very often what happens. We are talking about the conditions that are organized for teachers to do that. And the conditions that organize education are the policies, the systems, the practices that are put into place. Teacher-led communities of practice. Teachers should be empowered to be teacher leaders in schools and scenarios where we want to see this type of relationship, this type of learning, this type of agency, and this type of demonstration, right, of learning happening. Hybrid learning plans, and we're talking now in this reality both about the different modalities in which students learn, but we're also talking about the different modalities in which we're going to have to be teaching and learning right now, right? The classroom, the digital world, what does it look like? How is it organized? How is it organized in a way that possibly leads to more problem-based learning? I don't know, if I'm sitting at home at a computer all day, I think it would be much more enriching for me to be researching something and creating something than to be filling in a worksheet or just responding to a set of questions that someone has asked to me. Student-led after-school enrichment. What does it look like to have students leading their clubs, to have students surveying each other for what they want to have in terms of their enrichment, and then creating plans to put that in place. And then lastly, community-centric and responsive supports. And so I use the word community-centric again to go back to this idea that real needs should have real supports. And the only way to get to real supports is to go directly to the community, whatever community that is, the teacher community, the student community, the administrator community, the parent community, the community, and ask them what they need and put in place the things that respond directly to what has been said by those individuals that will help them help our students achieve their highest intellectual performance in school. So here's a few COVID-minded strategies to reimagine schooling. And these are initial thinking. We're all in a moment that none of us really anticipated that we would be in. And so as we were putting this together, we just kind of thought about what would be some ideas that would start to help us reimagine and think about what schooling looks like as we go forward. And so I just want to start with a basic equity principle, right, that gets back to belief. You have to believe that all students should have everything they need accessible to them and put it in place to make learning possible. So schools have to ensure that every school in the district is it's clean, it's safe, that they've done the planning that's necessary, that whatever personal protection equipment they need is there, and that there are resources also attached to that to make them feel safe, right? So when kids go back to school, there's going to be anxiety. When teachers go back to school, there's going to be anxiety, whatever the arrangement looks like. And so those resources have to be there to facilitate and bring about a feeling of safety and security, because there is no community of belonging where people don't feel safe. We're going to have to redesign the use of time, space, and technology. And I'm going to suggest that we should redesign it to maximize team teaching, peer learning, projects, research, and voice, right? So time is not just the amount of time that students spend in class, but it might be the number of days that people are in school. It might be the amount of time they're on the computer. The virtual world has now become another space. So all of those things are going to have to be rethought. And I personally think it's a wonderful thing to have to rethink how we do absolutely everything that's related to learning, because we might have been doing it wrong all along. Create an independent teacher recovery task force that analyzes school and district data and makes recommendations. Bring teachers together. Ask what happened during COVID. Ask what worked, what didn't work, and then have teachers design a plan to help them instructionally put in place the things that are going to be necessary for students when they return. Survey and engage the entire school district community to identify school opening needs and plan for those needs to be met. And again, this is whether school opening is in a building, whether it's on a computer, and whether what is probably going to be a very likely scenario, a hybrid. So I've heard stories of teachers that didn't have computers at home. You can't require teachers to teach virtually if they don't have computers. And if you're requiring them to do that, then you're going to have to provide them the tools that they need to get that done. Use technology to empower project-based learning and performance assessment. Do we now have an opportunity to rethink what assessment is? Wouldn't that be amazing? Provide all staff with appropriate training on trauma, social emotional learning, culturally responsive and sustaining education, and restorative justice and conflict resolution. So I just want to, these are all very important. And a line that has sort of opened up in this COVID era is that teachers and school districts now have direct windows into students' homes. And the social, emotional, and the culturally responsive pieces become very important, because now you're inside people's homes, right? They become important in a different kind of way. And so if you're viewing something that's happening in someone's home and you really don't have a foundational understanding of what underlies what you're seeing, then assumptions are going to be made. That's what people do. And so to support this new reality of learning and teaching that we're in, we're going to have to give everyone in the system a different framework of analysis for how they view anything that is happening in front of them. Because the way that it will be viewed in the absence of this is from our bias, from the belief system that we're operating on, from the ways in which we've traditionally seen things. And so this training has been important, and now it like everything else is at another level of importance, because we don't want to diminish the possibility of learning when students are further distanced from us by putting our own levels of assumption on them virtually and interpreting behavior, and possibly even leading to referrals, phone calls, and things that may not be necessary because we saw something and we didn't know what we were seeing. And then the last thing that I'll add is offering teachers wellness resources, programs, and incentives to support their social, emotional, and physical well-being. We're in the dish together, right? Teachers are in the classroom with students, and social relationships are fragile, but they're also beautiful. And in the same ways that students need support and resources, teachers need those too. They're engaged with lots of children all day, and it has an effect on teachers. And then you layer on the reality that we're in, and that has another layer of effect on teachers. And so for students to learn well, we have to support teachers to be well. And I just have to offer this. I did not know that Tony was actually going to show up, but I'm just going to be honest, right? We got to take some action. All of what we're saying is real. These are the practices that drives learning. Everyone knows this. But without the advocacy and the organizing that is necessary to create those conditions, we're going to have the same conversation again at the same time that there's another situation like this that emerges. And so these pictures are, again, very personal to me. This is the Newark Student Union, the students who were very, very influential in the return of local control to our schools, who really got out there and fought the fight in a way that many adults could not because of position and because of the relational dynamics. And so whatever it is that we want to happen in this moment, we're going to have to come together, come to consensus, develop agendas, develop organizing strategies, and get out there together to make it happen. And so for all the teachers, should I go into this? Nah, I'm not going to go into this.
No, you can't. Unfortunately, it's almost 12:15.
Is it really? Okay, so
yeah.
For all the teachers, I just want to give a shout out to Newark Public Schools, to all the teachers that are on this video chat with us. I reached out to some principals and asked them to send a few names from their schools of teachers that they wanted to shout out because it is Teacher Appreciation Week. And just to say that we see you, that although it may feel isolated and lonely in the classroom sometimes, that there are folks out here who in different ways are advocating for the same things that you all want. So thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you. You want to take your share screen off?
I sure do.
It's okay. All right, so we know you, this audience, there are still 37 diehards out there, and we know you have been holding on for a really long time. I appreciate that. We just want to end with a poem for you because it is Teacher Appreciation. So I'm going to put my share screen back on, go back up here, and I'm just, if you excuse me for going, actually, I'm going to go out here so I can move. Let's see, I think the screen sharing has stopped. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to share the poem and I'm going to find it so I can leave with it because it's very powerful in terms of you all. And so I'm going to put back on screen share. And I, again, appreciate you all being here still. Here we go, share screen. And so let's see, just end this here on this slide and just say for all of you, the 37, the 100 who were originally on this, I just want to say that this whole idea of equity consciousness is how we not only engage students, but how we affirm you. So I want to just share a poem that I think pays tribute to you that was written by a student that affirms you, and it says, to you, I might just be another child lost in society's universal negativity. I suppose now is the time for heads to turn away and shoulders to shrug. Know this, stereotypes can only go so far, last so long, and mean so much. Why listen to rumors with no definition or destination? Not only can I name all the states and capitals memorized since the 3rd grade, I can read Romeo and Juliet with no hesitation, because that one English teacher is not in it for the money and free summers, because she cares with the heart that goes past the extreme for not only me, but all 150 of her students, her children. Miracles can happen, dreams can come true. I share this with you because you are the ones the students are longing for. Please stay safe, and thank you for joining us. Have
Thank
a good
you.
Bye-bye, Lauren. Thanks for a lot. Bye-bye. And we got a lot of, can you see now the chat,
Thank you,
Lauren?
everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
presenters.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.